In the early 20th century, the world stood on the edge of discoveries that would change everything. Scientists across Europe and America were unlocking the deepest secrets of the atom, unaware that their findings would soon become the foundation of the deadliest weapon mankind had ever imagined. The story of the atomic bomb does not begin on a battlefield. It begins in quiet laboratories, with chalk dust, equations, and long nights of relentless curiosity. In 1938, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, made a discovery that startled the scientific community. They split the uranium atom, an event later explained by Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch as nuclear fission. It meant that with the right conditions, unimaginable energy could be released in a sudden burst. This breakthrough spread rapidly through the scientific world. Many saw it as a marvel of physics, but a few saw something else: danger. Across Europe, fear was growing. Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime was expanding aggressively, and the possibility that Germany might harness nuclear fission for a powerful new weapon terrified scientists, especially those who had fled the Nazis. Among them was Albert Einstein, living quietly in the United States, and physicist Leo Szilard, who had long feared that splitting the atom could lead to a destructive chain reaction. Szilard believed that if Nazi Germany developed an atomic bomb first, the consequences would be catastrophic. He urged Einstein to write a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a letter that would change the course of history. Einstein agreed, warning Roosevelt of the grave danger and urging the United States to begin its own research into nuclear weapons. Roosevelt read the letter carefully, then took action. A small advisory committee was formed, marking the first step in what would soon become a massive scientific and military undertaking. Meanwhile, Europe was engulfed in war. Germany invaded Poland in 1939, launching World War II. As nations fell and the Nazi war machine advanced, the urgency of nuclear research increased. Scientists who had escaped Europe now worked in American universities and labs, driven not by ambition, but by fear that Hitler's scientists were racing ahead. But Germany's program was disorganized, limited by resources, and slowed by internal confusion. American intelligence wouldn't know that until much later. For now, the fear persisted, and so did the momentum. By 1941, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada were quietly coordinating research. The goal was clear: understand nuclear fission and determine whether an atomic bomb was truly possible. Some scientists doubted it, others were sure, but no one could afford to be wrong. As the war intensified, the U.S. government prepared to take the next step. A secret project unlike anything the world had ever seen. A project that would consume billions of dollars, thousands of workers. By late 1941, the United States stood at a crossroads. The threat from Nazi Germany loomed larger every day, and the scientific community was urging the government to act quickly. A groundbreaking discovery had opened a door to unimaginable power, and now the question was no longer whether nuclear fission was real, it was whether a weapon based on it could be built. Before the enemy succeeded, the U.S. government decided to take the risk. A secret scientific and military operation began to take shape, one that would eventually be known as the Manhattan Project. The project, officially, started when President Roosevelt approved a full-scale effort to research uranium fission. The name Manhattan was chosen simply because the Army Corps of Engineers first set up its offices in Manhattan, New York, but the true work would take place far from crowded cities, hidden behind fences, mountains, and armed guards. The government needed secrecy, and above all, speed. General Leslie Groves, a determined and famously tough military officer, was placed in charge. Groves had just overseen the construction of the Pentagon and was known for pushing massive projects forward with relentless force. He wasted no time. His first major decision was selecting J. Robert Oppenheimer as the project's scientific director. Oppenheimer was brilliant, intense, and deeply knowledgeable in theoretical physics. Many doubted whether he could handle leading thousands of people, but Groves believed he was the only one with the vision required. Together, Groves and Oppenheimer formed the core leadership of the Manhattan Project. They moved quickly, gathering scientists from universities across America, many of them refugees who had fled Europe. These scientists understood the stakes more than anyone. They had seen the darkness rising overseas. They knew what might happen if Hitler gained access to nuclear weapons. The next task was creating secret cities, entire communities, built from scratch for the sole purpose of research and production. In Tennessee, the government secured land for Oak Ridge, a vast facility focused on producing enriched uranium. In Washington state, the isolated desert near the Columbia River became the Hanford site, dedicated to producing plutonium. And in New Mexico, the quiet mesas of Los Alamos were chosen for the design and testing of the actual bomb. Workers arrived by the thousands: engineers, machinists, chemists, soldiers, and their families. They signed secrecy agreements and were told to ask no questions. People lived behind barbed wire, guarded gates, and strict rules. Even the workers themselves often didn't know what they were contributing to. They saw only pieces of a puzzle. Only a handful of leaders knew the full picture. Across America, entire communities sprang up almost overnight, secret cities built with speed, urgency, and absolute silence. These places did not appear on maps. Their residents had no idea what the others were working on. Mail was censored. Conversations were monitored. Everything was controlled to maintain one truth: the Manhattan Project had to remain invisible. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, became the largest of these secret cities. Surrounded by thick forests and guarded by checkpoints, Oak Ridge was constructed to enrich uranium using huge machines called calutrons. These machines required so much electricity that the city consumed more energy than most major U.S. cities combined. Workers operated the equipment day and night, yet many of them, especially the young women hired as operators, never knew the purpose of the knobs they turned or the gauges they watched. They were told only one thing: do your job precisely and do not ask questions. Far across the country, Hanford in Washington state emerged in the middle of a vast desert. Its mission was different. While Oak Ridge focused on uranium, Hanford was built to produce plutonium, a man-made element even more powerful for use in nuclear weapons. To accomplish this, enormous nuclear reactors rose on the barren landscape, their concrete walls thick and cold. Engineers battled problems no one had ever faced before: radiation leaks, overheating, and unpredictable chemical reactions. Every mistake had deadly consequences. Yet the workers endured long shifts, harsh conditions, and constant pressure, all driven by the belief that their efforts might help end the war. In New Mexico, Los Alamos became the scientific heart of the project. Perched on a remote mesa, it gathered some of the greatest minds of the century. Physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and engineers lived in simple houses, while their children played in dusty yards under the watchful eyes of armed guards. The scientists debated fiercely, filled blackboards with equations, and tested theories that had no precedent. Under the leadership of Oppenheimer, Los Alamos developed two bomb designs: a uranium-based gun-type weapon and a more complex plutonium implosion device. Life in these cities was unlike anywhere else. People lived together, worked together, and kept secrets together. They were isolated from the world, yet deeply connected to a mission they barely understood. Many believed they were working on radar, medicine, or some new industrial technique. Only a select few knew the truth: that this project aimed to create a weapon capable of altering the future of civilization itself. Though the cities resembled ordinary towns with schools, grocery stores, and movie theaters, the atmosphere was tense. Military police patrolled the streets. Identification badges were required everywhere. A single slip of the tongue could lead to interrogation or expulsion. The workers learned to live with. Inside the guarded gates of Los Alamos, some of the most brilliant minds of the era worked side by side. Yet behind the genius, there were conflicts, doubts, and moral dilemmas that weighed heavily on everyone involved. The Manhattan Project was not only a scientific race, it was a human struggle: an emotional, ethical, and intellectual battlefield. Oppenheimer, often called the father of the atomic bomb, was at the center of this whirlwind. His sharp intellect made him the perfect scientific leader, but the pressure he carried was immense. He worked tirelessly, moving from lab to lab, checking calculations, mediating arguments, and pushing the project forward. Many admired him, others quietly feared him, but everyone recognized that without Oppenheimer's vision and guidance, the project could fall apart. Scientists from different backgrounds filled Los Alamos. Some were Nobel Prize winners, others young talents still in their 20s. They battled the clock, racing to solve problems that had no previous solutions. Theoretical physicists debated over chain reactions, while engineers struggled to turn ideas into devices that could actually work. Every day brought new challenges: materials that behaved unpredictably, calculations that failed, equipment that malfunctioned. Mistakes were costly and sometimes dangerous. Despite the intense pressure, moments of normal life still managed to break through. Families gathered for small picnics. Children played in the dusty streets. Scientists attended lectures or joined musical sessions where Oppenheimer sometimes read poetry. But even in those peaceful moments, the reality of their purpose lingered like a shadow. They knew they were building a weapon so powerful that it could wipe out entire cities in seconds. Many scientists, especially those who had fled Europe to escape the Nazis, felt a moral obligation to continue their work. They feared that Germany might succeed first. But by 1944, intelligence reports indicated that the German atomic program was far behind. For some at Los Alamos, this news brought relief. For others, it brought new doubts. If the threat was smaller than expected, should the project still move forward at full speed? These questions created tension. Some scientists openly expressed concerns about the weapon's future use. They worried about what the world would look like after the bomb was built. But the military leadership, led by General Groves, remained firm. The project would continue, and its goal would not change. The United States was still at war, and the bomb was seen as the quickest way to end it. As the pressure grew, disagreements became more frequent. Some scientists questioned the safety of the implosion design. Others argued about the best materials to use. Meanwhile, deadlines loomed closer. The project consumed massive resources, and the government expected results. As the Manhattan Project expanded, its scientists realized they were racing along not one path, but two different materials. Uranium-235 and plutonium-239 offered two possible routes to building a nuclear bomb. Each path came with unique challenges, dangers, and scientific puzzles. To win the race, both had to be understood, tested, and controlled. The uranium path began at Oak Ridge. Uranium ore naturally contains mostly uranium-238, a stable isotope that cannot fuel a nuclear explosion. The weapon-capable isotope, uranium-235, makes up less than 1% of natural uranium. Separating these two isotopes was like separating grains of sand that differed in weight by a fraction. It required vast machines, complicated processes, and incredible precision. Massive electromagnetic calutrons hummed day and night, consuming unbelievable amounts of power. Thousands of workers monitored dials and switches with no idea that their hands were shaping the core of a future weapon. Even when enriched uranium began to accumulate, it was far from ready. The bomb design, called the gun-type weapon, required uranium pieces to be slammed together at extremely high speed to create a chain reaction. It seemed simple in theory, but engineers worried about premature detonation, overheating, and unpredictable nuclear behavior. Every test had to be calculated with absolute care. A single miscalculation could trigger disaster. The plutonium path, meanwhile, took shape at the Hanford site. Plutonium was not found in nature. It had to be created inside massive nuclear reactors. At Hanford, these reactors produced intense radiation as uranium fuel rods transformed into plutonium. Workers faced dangerous conditions, dealing with heat, radiation, and pipes carrying toxic materials. Inside the reactors, chemical reactions produced powerful energy, and even small mistakes could lead to poisoning or fires. But the real challenge was not producing plutonium, it was using it. Early tests revealed a frightening problem. Plutonium behaved differently than expected. Its neutrons were released too quickly for the simple gun-type design to work. If used in that design, the bomb would explode too early, producing only a small fraction of its intended power. Scientists had to rethink everything. This problem led to the creation of the implosion design, a revolutionary idea requiring precise symmetry and controlled shock waves. Instead of slamming pieces together, the plutonium core would be compressed from all sides using explosive lenses. It was a bold concept, far more complex than anything attempted before. Achieving perfect symmetry seemed nearly impossible. Engineers struggled with shaping explosives, measuring tiny timing differences, and understanding how pressure would behave under extreme conditions. Los Alamos became a battleground of equations. By 1944, the Manhattan Project had grown into one of the largest scientific efforts in history, yet success was still not guaranteed. The implosion design, the only workable method for a plutonium bomb, was proving dangerously unpredictable. Traditional physics offered no clear answers. The scientists at Los Alamos were building a device that had never been imagined before, and every new test pushed them deeper into unknown territory. One of the most important tools developed during this period was the Rala experiment. Using radioactive lanthanum, scientists tested how explosive shock waves behaved when compressing a metal sphere. These tests revealed that even tiny imperfections in timing or shape could cause failure. The bomb core needed perfect symmetry, delivered in microseconds. Achieving that level of precision was like trying to squeeze a balloon evenly from all sides without bursting it. Explosive lenses had to be sculpted with mathematical accuracy, something no one had ever attempted. While engineers worked with explosives, theoretical physicists struggled over the calculations governing nuclear reactions. Each number mattered. A miscalculated neutron lifetime or incorrect density estimate could render the entire design useless. Los Alamos became a battlefield of chalkboard symbols, diagrams, and furious debates filling every room. Some scientists argued for thicker explosive shells. Others pushed for new types of detonators. Tempers ran high. Hours were long. Progress was slow but relentless. Amidst the pressure, another crucial challenge appeared: how to safely test components without triggering a nuclear explosion. Subcritical assemblies, nicknamed tickling the dragon's tail, allowed scientists to bring uranium or plutonium close to critical mass without crossing the deadly threshold. These tests were terrifying. One slip or misjudgment could cause a burst of radiation or worse. Yet, they continued because the bomb demanded answers. At the same time, the war in Europe was shifting. By early 1945, Germany was collapsing. Many scientists who had joined the project to stop Hitler now questioned their purpose. If Germany posed no nuclear threat, why were they still building the bomb at full speed? But the military held firm. Japan remained a powerful enemy, and American leaders believed a decisive strike might end the war quickly. For scientists with moral doubts, this reasoning brought little comfort. To make matters more intense, deadlines loomed closer. The U.S. Army wanted the bomb ready before the end of the war, and General Groves enforced strict timelines. Every department worked under pressure: metallurgy, explosives, chemistry, physics, engineering. Failures were not allowed. Each setback meant long nights of revisions. Each success brought only momentary relief before the next problem appeared. The desert of New Mexico stretched endlessly beneath a silent sky. In this remote landscape, far from cities and rumors, the final stage of the Manhattan Project was about to unfold. The scientists had worked for years, chasing theories, conducting dangerous experiments, and shaping metal into a device unlike anything seen before. Now, everything rested on one test: Trinity. Preparations began months earlier. The chosen site, known as the Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of the Dead Man, was harsh, empty, and unforgiving. This isolation made it perfect for a test of unimaginable power. Soldiers, engineers, and scientists built observation bunkers, Power lines, instrument towers, and secure roads. Every piece of equipment had to withstand extreme heat and shock. The landscape slowly transformed into a secret scientific fortress. The bomb itself, nicknamed the Gadget, was the first working version of the plutonium implosion design. Its core contained the plutonium produced at Hanford, material that had taken immense resources to create. The outer shell held precisely shaped explosive lenses and a web of detonators timed to fire within microseconds of each other. The scientists believed it would work, but certainty was impossible. Theories could only go so far. In early July 1945, the Gadget was assembled at a nearby ranch house that had been taken over by the project. The atmosphere was tense, filled with quiet concentration. Workers moved with caution, aware that one mistake could cost lives. When the assembly was complete, the device was transported to the test tower, a tall steel structure rising like a skeleton from the desert floor. The bomb was hoisted slowly to the top and bolted in place. Instrumentation teams began setting up around the test area. High-speed cameras were installed to capture the explosion. Blast gauges were buried in the sand. Radiation detectors were carefully calibrated. Everything had to be perfect. Some scientists prepared for the possibility of failure. Others whispered fears of a runaway chain reaction. One rumor, half joke and half terror, suggested the bomb might ignite the atmosphere. Though calculations dismissed this, the thought lingered in the back of many minds. As the date approached, the weather became a growing concern. Sudden storms threatened to delay the test and disrupt the measurements. General Groves demanded updates constantly, while Oppenheimer moved from group to group, checking details and offering calm reassurance. He carried the weight of the project heavily, knowing that the outcome of the test would define history. On the night of July 15th, hundreds of personnel gathered in bunkers and observation posts miles away from the tower. The final hours ticked by in silence. Lightning flashed on the horizon. Winds shifted unpredictably. Scientists huddled over instruments, waiting for the signal to begin countdown. Some prayed, others stared quietly into the darkness. At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the dark desert sky over New Mexico lit up with a brilliance that no human eye had ever witnessed before. The Trinity test had begun. For a moment, the world stood still, then exploded into light. Inside the observation bunkers, scientists and soldiers braced themselves as the countdown reached zero. A blinding flash erupted across the horizon, so bright that one scientist later said it made the sun seem dim. The surrounding mountains glowed as if illuminated by lightning. For the first few seconds, no sound reached the observers. They watched in stunned silence as a roaring fireball rose from the tower, expanding rapidly into the sky. Then came the shockwave. A thunderous boom rolled across the desert, shaking the ground, rattling equipment, and hitting the bunkers with a force that left many breathless. The explosion's wind swept across the sand, flattening everything in its path. Even miles away, the heat was felt on faces and arms. Some people shielded their eyes. Others stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The fireball rose higher, forming a towering column of smoke and flame. Within seconds, it transformed into the first nuclear mushroom cloud in human history. The glowing stem twisted upward, feeding into a vast, billowing cloud that pulsed with eerie light. The desert, once silent and empty, was now the scene of the most powerful, man-made explosion ever created. Oppenheimer, watching from a distance, felt a storm of emotions. He had spent years driving the project forward, solving impossible problems, leading brilliant minds. Yet as the fireball reflected in his glasses, he sensed the weight of what had been unleashed. Later, he would recall a line from ancient scripture, "Now am become death, the destroyer of worlds." At that moment, he knew the world had crossed a line that could never be reversed. General Leslie Groves, standing nearby, focused only on the technical success. The bomb had worked. The implosion design, a concept once dismissed as too complicated, had proven its devastating capability. Groves immediately began planning the next steps, production, deployment, and military use. The war against Japan was still raging, and he believed the bomb would force a quick surrender. Scientists slowly emerged from bunkers, their faces pale and stunned. Some cheered, others stood in quiet shock. A few felt an immediate sense of dread. They measured radiation levels, analyzed instrument readings, and recorded data. The power of the explosion far exceeded expectations. The energy released was equivalent to roughly 20,000 tons of TNT. The tower that once held the gadget had completely vanished, vaporized. As the mushroom cloud drifted upward for miles, a new reality settled over the team. The experiment had succeeded beyond doubt. The United States now possessed a weapon capable of unimaginable destruction. The project that had begun in secrecy, fear, and scientific curiosity had. When the Trinity mushroom cloud settled and the data confirmed success, the Manhattan Project shifted from scientific experimentation to military urgency. The war in Europe had ended, but the Pacific conflict continued with brutal intensity. Japan showed no sign of surrender, and American military planners feared that an invasion could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. In this atmosphere, the atomic bomb was no longer just a scientific achievement. Now, it was a weapon waiting for a decision. Inside high-level government rooms, debates intensified. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had died months earlier, and the responsibility now rested on President Harry S. Truman. He had assumed office knowing little of the Manhattan Project. Yet suddenly, he was in control of the most powerful weapon ever created. Advisors briefed him on the bomb's potential. The message was clear. This device could end the war quickly, but at a terrible cost. The interim committee, group formed to consider the bomb's use, met throughout June 1945. They were political leaders, scientists, and military officers. Their discussions ranged from technical details to moral consequences. Some argued the bomb must be demonstrated in an uninhabited area first, giving Japan a chance to surrender. Others warned such a demonstration might fail or be ignored, weakening America's position. General Groves and his military colleagues insisted the weapon should be used without delay. They believed only a direct strike on a major Japanese city would force surrender. To them, prolonging the war meant countless more deaths on both sides. The committee eventually agreed. The bomb would be used against Japan as soon as it was ready. Meanwhile, many scientists reacted very differently. At Los Alamos and Chicago laboratories, fear and guilt spread quietly. Some physicists who once worked enthusiastically now questioned whether this weapon should ever be used. A group of scientists prepared the famous Frank Report, urging a peaceful demonstration and warning of an uncontrolled nuclear arms race. But their voices were overshadowed by military urgency and political pressure. Oppenheimer himself struggled privately. He understood the bomb better than anyone and knew the devastation it would bring. Yet he believed that ending the war quickly might prevent even greater suffering. His emotions were a mixture of pride, sorrow, and responsibility. He walked a narrow line between scientific triumph and moral uncertainty. As the debate continued, military preparations accelerated. Bomb units trained on Tinian Island in the Pacific, specially modified B-29 bombers were outfitted to carry the new weapons. Crews practiced loading procedures, flight patterns, and emergency protocols. Every detail had to be exact. The world's first nuclear weapons were ready for deployment. All they needed was an order. By late July, intelligence reports suggested Japan was weakening but still determined to fight. As 1945 unfolded, the world stood on the edge of a scientific and moral precipice. The Manhattan Project had moved from theoretical discussions to final preparations. Every scientist, soldier, and engineer in Los Alamos felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. They had built something unprecedented, an energy source capable of reshaping civilization or destroying it entirely. Now came the moment to prove whether their calculations worked, whether the theories born in notebooks and chalkboards would unleash the force of a miniature sun on the earth. General Leslie Groves intensified pressure on the team. The war in Europe had ended, but Japan still resisted fiercely. America wanted a decisive blow to force surrender and avoid what military leaders predicted would be a catastrophic ground invasion. Scientists like Oppenheimer, Fermi, Beeth, and Teller began to realize that their invention would not remain a scientific milestone, it would become a weapon deployed in the real world, on real cities against civilians. But the momentum of war had grown so immense that no one believed they could stop it. The first test was scheduled for July 16, 1945, in the desert of Alamogordo, New Mexico. The site was named Trinity, a title chosen by Oppenheimer, inspired by a poem that spoke of death, divinity, and human frailty. As the date approached, tension built in the labs. Some scientists feared the bomb might be a dud. Others whispered darkly that the reaction could ignite the atmosphere itself. Teller even brought sunscreen to the test, joking or perhaps worrying that the light might burn their skin even miles away. Technicians climbed the 100-foot steel tower and assembled the bomb's core. Thin wires connected its components. Explosives were arranged with mathematical precision. If anything was even slightly off, the chain reaction would fail. As the bomb was hoisted into place, storm clouds rolled over the desert. Scientists watched anxiously, hoping the weather would clear. By nightfall, the sky calmed, but the weight in their hearts only grew heavier. At 5:29 a.m., spectators in bunkers and trenches put on welding goggles and turned away. A final countdown echoed across the barren land. Then, in a fraction of a second, a blinding flash lit the desert brighter than daylight. A towering fireball rose upward, boiling and pulsating as the shockwave raced across the sand. Moments later, the ground trembled, and a deafening explosion rolled over the observers. Those who witnessed it were struck silent. Some felt triumph, others horror. Oppenheimer remembered a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The world had changed forever. But this was only the beginning. In Washington, military officials prepared deployment plans. The bomb had proven its power. Now, they would decide where to use it, how to present it to the world, and what message it would send to friend and enemy alike. In the days following the Trinity test, the success of the atomic bomb spread quietly through the highest levels of the U.S. government. The scientists at Los Alamos celebrated, but their joy was mixed with deep anxiety. They had opened a door that could never again be closed. In Washington, President Harry Truman was briefed on the weapon's destructive power. Even he seemed stunned by the magnitude of what America now possessed. War planners quickly moved into the final stage, selecting the targets and determining how the atomic bomb would be used to end the conflict with Japan. A special military committee, the Target Selection Board, met to determine which cities would make the list. They chose locations that held industrial, military, and psychological significance. Among them were Hiroshima, Kokura, Nagata, and Nagasaki. The goal was not just to damage Japan's war capabilities, it was to shock the nation into unconditional surrender. Many scientists had hoped that a demonstration explosion on an uninhabited island might persuade Japan without civilian casualties, but the military dismissed the idea, arguing it carried too much risk, including the possibility of a failed demonstration. Meanwhile, Japanese forces continued their desperate defense across the Pacific. Despite suffering massive losses and facing starvation from naval blockades, the Japanese leadership refused to surrender. Their strategy rested on inflicting enough casualties on invading American forces to negotiate better terms. American military planners predicted that a land invasion might cost over 1 million Allied lives. This calculation weighed heavily on the decision to use the atomic bomb. At Los Alamos, Oppenheimer convened meetings to discuss the moral implications. Some scientists signed petitions urging President Truman to reconsider. Others argued that their duty was to finish the job. The decision to use the bomb was political, not scientific. The group was divided, but the machinery of war was already in motion. The bomb was no longer in the hands of the scientists. It now belonged to the military and the government. On Tinian Island in the Pacific, The U.S. Air Force prepared the aircraft chosen for the mission, a modified B-29 Superfortress named Enola Gay, after the pilot's mother. The crew trained rigorously, practicing high-altitude bombing runs and emergency escape maneuvers. Mechanics fitted the enormous, Little Boy uranium bomb into its specially designed cradle. Every bolt, wire, and circuit was inspected repeatedly. No chances could be taken. As the mission date approached, the mood among the crew was tense. They understood the bomb was unlike anything ever used in warfare. Some felt pride, others felt unease. Colonel Paul Tibbets, the pilot, kept his thoughts guarded. He knew their actions would be judged for generations. As the Enola Gay soared over the Pacific, the crew settled into their positions. For the most consequential bombing mission in human history, the aircraft carried the world's first uranium-based atomic weapon, known as Little Boy. Its mechanisms were armed but incomplete. The final electrical components would be activated only after the plane was safely en route. Major Thomas Farabee, the bombardier, viewed the target maps one last time. Their destination was a city untouched by previous bombings. Hiroshima. Hiroshima, spread across the delta of the Oda River, was a bustling urban center with military headquarters, factories, and tens of thousands of civilians. Because it had not been heavily bombed earlier, it provided a clean measurement for the bomb's destructive potential. On that morning, as residents prepared for another day, no one imagined what was approaching from the sky. Back aboard the aircraft, Captain William Parsons completed the bomb's final arming procedure. Sweat dripped down his temples as he carefully connected the firing mechanism. A single mistake could doom the crew. After a tense few minutes, Parsons confirmed the bomb was fully armed. The Enola Gay continued toward its target at cruising altitude. As dawn broke, the plane neared Hiroshima. Weather reconnaissance flights had radioed back clear skies, ideal conditions. Below, early morning commuters moved along the streets. Schoolchildren walked to class. Soldiers gathered for roll call. Life continued with routine normalcy, unaware that time was running out. At 8:15 a.m., the Enola Gay reached the aiming point, the T-shaped Iowa Bridge. Farabee aligned the crosshairs of the Norden bomb site with precise focus. His voice broke the silence. Bomb away. With a metallic thud, Little Boy dropped from the aircraft's belly, beginning its 40-second descent. The moment the bomb released, Tibbets executed a sharp escape maneuver, turning the aircraft away at full power. The crew braced for the shockwave they had been warned about. Below them, the bomb sliced through the air, its internal mechanisms activating in sequence. At approximately 1,900 feet above the city, Little Boy detonated. A blinding flash erupted, pure white light, brighter than the sun. In an instant, buildings vaporized, shadows burned into walls, and tens of thousands of lives were extinguished. A boiling fireball expanded outward, transforming into a towering mushroom cloud that rose miles into the sky. The shockwave followed, flattening homes, igniting fires, and shattering windows dozens of kilometers away. Inside the Enola Gay, the aircraft jolted violently as the blast wave caught up. The crew turned back and saw the sky behind them filled with a monstrous column of smoke and fire. Even from their distance, the sheer size of the explosion left them stunned. No one spoke for several moments. In the hours after Hiroshima was destroyed, the shockwaves, both political and moral, spread across the world. The U.S. government released a statement declaring the use of a new, powerful weapon, but few understood the true scale of destruction. Communications from Hiroshima had gone silent. Japanese leaders received only fragmented reports. A single bomb had destroyed an entire city. Even then, many in Tokyo could not believe it. Some suspected a massive chemical attack. Others believed the Americans had used multiple bombs at once. The reality was too extraordinary to grasp immediately. In Washington, President Truman announced that if Japan did not surrender, more atomic bombs would follow. The United States now held a weapon unlike anything in history, and the world was forced to witness its terrifying capabilities. Yet Japan's Supreme War Council remained divided. even after the unimaginable devastation of Hiroshima. Some leaders still argued for continuing the war, hoping for better peace terms or Soviet mediation. While political debates continued, the scientists at Los Alamos reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt pride, others were horrified. Reports of the destruction left many questioning their role. Oppenheimer, standing in front of his colleagues, spoke softly. The physicists have known sin. Some scientists expressed regret that their creation had been used without warning, but their criticisms were overshadowed by the momentum of war and the urgent drive to end it quickly. Meanwhile, on Tinian Island, preparations had already begun for the second atomic bomb. This device, known as Fat Man, was more complex than Little Boy. It used plutonium and relied on an implosion mechanism similar to the Trinity test. The plane chosen for the mission was another modified B-29 named Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney. The ground crews worked tirelessly, loading the spherical bomb into the aircraft with extreme care. The team had no certainty that Japan would surrender after Hiroshima. The plan remained unchanged. If Japan refused, the second bomb would be used. By August 8, the situation became more complicated. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan, launching a massive invasion into Japanese-held Manchuria. This sudden development shocked Tokyo. Japan had hoped the Soviets might help negotiate peace. Instead, they now faced another powerful enemy. Yet even with both the atomic bomb and the Soviet entry into the war, some Japanese leaders still resisted surrender. On the night of August 8, American military commanders authorized the second atomic mission. The target was Kokura, a major industrial city. If weather conditions were poor, the secondary target would be Nagasaki. The crew of Boxcar prepared for takeoff before dawn, unaware of how history would judge their mission. Their orders were clear: proceed unless instructed otherwise. The world after Nagasaki entered a state of stunned silence. News of the second atomic bombing spread rapidly through military channels, diplomatic offices, and foreign governments. For Japan, the destruction of yet another city just 3 days after Hiroshima shattered any remaining confidence that the war could be continued. The nation's leaders gathered in Tokyo, exhausted, divided, and painfully aware that the empire was on the brink of collapse. On August 9, as smoke still rose from Nagasaki, the Supreme War Council met once again. The debate was fierce. Some insisted on fighting on, demanding conditions to preserve the emperor's authority, avoid occupation, and maintain partial control of the military. Others argued that further resistance was hopeless. With the Soviets invading from the north, and the Americans wielding unimaginable new weapons, surrender became the only realistic path to survival. By midnight, no consensus had been reached. The council was deadlocked. That night, for the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito intervened directly in the government's decision-making process. In a calm but resolute voice, he stated that continuing the war would only lead to the annihilation of the Japanese people. He urged acceptance of the Allied terms. His words broke the stalemate. Still, not everyone supported surrender. A faction within the military launched a desperate coup attempt, hoping to seize the imperial palace and prevent the emperor's decision from reaching the outside world. Soldiers surrounded the palace, cutting phone lines and searching for key officials who held the surrender documents. But the rebellion, poorly planned and lacking broad support, collapsed by morning. The conspirators were arrested or took their own lives. The emperor's will prevailed. On August 15, 1945, people across Japan gathered around radios as Emperor Hirohito addressed the nation in a historic broadcast. His voice, solemn and trembling, announced that Japan would accept the terms of surrender. He spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, whose power could not be matched, and warned that continuing the conflict would lead to the total extinction of civilization. For many Japanese citizens, it was the first time they had ever heard their emperor speak. Around the world, celebrations erupted. In the United States, Britain, Australia, and across liberated nations, crowds poured into the streets. Soldiers embraced, civilians cheered, and church bells rang for the first time in years. The war that had consumed the world for nearly 6 years was finally over. Yet beneath the joy lay a sobering reality. Humanity had entered a new era. Never before had a single weapon held the power to eliminate an entire city in seconds. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but it also introduced unimaginable danger. Leaders around the world realized that if such weapons spread, the future of civilization would be permanently at risk. In the weeks following Japan's surrender, the world tried to comprehend the scale of devastation left behind. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were transformed into landscapes of twisted metal, scorched earth, and silent ruins. Entire neighborhoods had vanished. Families searched desperately for missing loved ones, while survivors burned, injured, and traumatized struggled to understand why they were still alive when so many around them had vanished in an instant. Doctors and nurses, overwhelmed and lacking supplies, faced injuries unlike anything seen before: severe burns, radiation sickness, and mysterious symptoms that baffled even the most experienced medical teams. American occupation forces entered Japan, not as conquerors, but as administrators of peace. Led by General Douglas MacArthur, the Allied forces began a massive humanitarian effort to stabilize the country. Food, medicine, and basic supplies were distributed to the surviving population. Teams of scientists and military experts conducted extensive surveys of the bombed cities to assess the effects of the atomic blasts. Their findings painted a grim picture. Buildings evaporated at ground zero, people reduced to shadows on walls, and radiation continuing to harm survivors long after the explosions had faded. Back in the United States, the Manhattan Project scientists returned to their universities and laboratories. Many felt deep guilt over the destruction their work had caused. Oppenheimer, once the intellectual driving force behind the bomb, now spoke openly about the dangers of nuclear weapons. In meetings with government officials, he warned that the world was at the dawn of a new and perilous age. His stance put him at odds with military leaders who saw the bomb not as a threat, but as a powerful tool for maintaining global dominance. The U.S. government, recognizing the unprecedented power of the atomic bomb, created the Atomic Energy Commission to control nuclear research. But even as the United States held a monopoly on nuclear weapons, other nations were already racing to catch up. The Soviet Union, America's former ally, launched its own secret nuclear program. Intelligence reports suggested that Soviet scientists were making significant progress. The unity that had existed during World War II dissolved almost instantly. Replaced by suspicion and competition, the world entered a new and uneasy period the Cold War defined, not by battlefield conflict but by the looming threat of nuclear annihilation. For the first time in history, nations possessed the ability to destroy each other completely. Diplomats and political leaders struggled to navigate this dangerous landscape, aware that even a single miscalculation could lead to catastrophe. As the Cold War tightened its grip on global politics, the legacy of the atomic bomb became the central force shaping international relations. The United States, confident in its technological lead, continued developing increasingly powerful nuclear weapons. The early atomic bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were only the beginning. New designs emerged more efficient, deadlier, and capable of being delivered across continents. Laboratories that once focused on wartime innovation shifted toward long-term nuclear research, fueled by government funding and military demand. Yet while America expanded its arsenal, the Soviet Union accelerated its own nuclear program with fierce determination. Under Joseph Stalin's strict direction, Soviet scientists worked day and night, often in complete secrecy, to replicate the technology demonstrated by the United States. Intelligence, leaks, and espionage played a significant role. Several members of the Manhattan Project, motivated by ideology or guilt, provided the Soviets with crucial information. These leaks significantly shortened the time needed for the Soviet Union to catch up. In 1949, Only 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviets successfully detonated their first atomic bomb. The balance of power shifted instantly. No longer did one nation hold ultimate military dominance. The world now faced a frightening reality: a nuclear standoff between two superpowers, each capable of destroying the other. Fear spread across continents. Governments built bunkers, conducted drills, and issued public advisories on how to respond in the event of an atomic blast. The idea of mutually assured destruction defined the new era. For ordinary people, the presence of nuclear weapons became an invisible weight. School children practiced duck and cover drills, hiding under desks as sirens blared. Families constructed fallout shelters in their backyards. Newspapers published diagrams showing how to survive a nuclear attack. Although most experts knew survival would be unlikely in a full-scale war, the public lived in constant tension, wondering if the next conflict would be humanity's last. Meanwhile, former Manhattan Project scientists grew increasingly vocal. Figures like Leo Szilard, Niels Bohr, and even Oppenheimer advocated for international control of nuclear materials. They believed that without cooperation and transparency, the world would spiral toward inevitable disaster. Their warnings, however, competed with political rhetoric fueled by fear, patriotism, and mistrust. Leaders on both sides saw disarmament as a risk they could not afford. In 1952, the United States tested the first hydrogen bomb, a weapon hundreds of times more powerful than those dropped on Japan. The explosion created a fireball bigger than entire islands, vaporizing everything in its path. Only 9 months later, the Soviet Union responded with an H-bomb of its own. The arms race accelerated beyond anything the world had ever witnessed. As the nuclear arms race surged forward, the world's greatest minds began to grapple not only with the destructive capabilities of atomic weapons, but with the moral weight they carried. The fear that had taken hold during the early Cold War years was not merely political, it reached deep into society, culture, and human consciousness. For many scientists who had helped create the bomb, the haunting images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remained etched in their memories, fueling their determination to prevent future catastrophe. Oppenheimer, once celebrated as a national hero, found himself increasingly at odds with U.S. military leaders. He advocated for limiting nuclear development, warning that the pursuit of ever more powerful weapons would only make the world more dangerous. His views were seen as un-American by some government officials. In 1954, during the height of Cold War paranoia, he was stripped of his security clearance in a controversial hearing. His fall from grace sent a chilling message to scientists. Questioning the arms race could cost them their careers. Meanwhile, nuclear testing became routine. The US and Soviet Union detonated bombs in remote deserts, vast oceans, and isolated islands. Each explosion sent radioactive fallout drifting across borders and oceans, affecting people far from the test sites. Residents of the Marshall Islands, near US test zones, suffered severe health effects, forced evacuations, and long-term radiation exposure. The world slowly realized that nuclear weapons did not simply threaten enemy nations, they threatened the planet itself. As public awareness grew, movements advocating for nuclear disarmament began to emerge. Writers, artists, and filmmakers produced works that imagined the horrors of nuclear war, sparking widespread fear and reflection. Anti-nuclear protests erupted across major cities. One of the earliest and most influential campaigns was the Ban the Bomb movement in Britain, which united students, workers, scientists, and ordinary families under a common cause: preventing nuclear annihilation. At the same time, world leaders recognized that unchecked nuclear escalation could lead to disaster. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. The United States and Soviet Union stood on the brink of launching missiles over disputed weapons in Cuba. For 13 tense days, humanity held its breath. Only through last-minute negotiations was war avoided. The crisis became a stark reminder that nuclear weapons, were not theoretical, they were real, and their use could happen in moments of miscalculation. This turning point forced leaders to take steps toward control and diplomacy. In 1963, the Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed, prohibiting nuclear tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. It was a small but significant. As the decades progressed, the world's uneasy relationship with nuclear weapons grew even more complex. The arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union did not simply continue, it escalated into a vast and expensive struggle for ultimate dominance. Both nations stockpiled thousands of warheads, far beyond what would be needed to destroy every major city on Earth. Nuclear submarines patrolled the oceans, hidden beneath the waves with enough firepower to end civilization. Massive missile silos were built across remote landscapes, each containing rockets armed with warheads, capable of annihilating entire regions in minutes. This era became known as the Age of Mutually Assured Destruction, a grim doctrine that stated neither side would dare start a nuclear war, because doing so would guarantee their own destruction. Paradoxically, peace depended on the threat of total annihilation. Leaders and military strategists called it deterrence. Critics called it insanity. Ordinary citizens lived under its shadow, wondering if the next conflict, misunderstanding, or political crisis would trigger the unthinkable. Despite the fear, moments of hope emerged. Diplomats and peace activists worldwide pushed for arms reduction. In 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) was introduced, urging nations to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The treaty sought three goals: to stop additional nations from building bombs, to promote peaceful uses of nuclear technology, and to encourage nuclear disarmament. Over the years, most of the world's nations joined, marking a rare moment of global unity. Still, the threat persisted. In the 1970s and 1982, tensions surged once again. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, NATO military expansions, and political rivalries brought the world dangerously close to conflict. Both sides continued to advance their technology, developing missile defense systems, tactical nuclear weapons, and space-based surveillance that could detect launches within seconds. Humanity was living in a world where mistakes, not just deliberate actions, could trigger catastrophe. But change was coming. In the late 1980s, a new wave of diplomacy transformed the global landscape. American President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met in a series of historic summits. Both men recognized that the arms race was unsustainable. Their meetings led to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles. For the first time in history, the superpowers agreed not just to limit, but to destroy weapons they had created. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the end of the Cold War. For a moment, it seemed as though the world might finally step back from the nuclear cliff. Stockpiles were reduced, facilities decommissioned, and thousands of warheads dismantled. As the 20th century came to a close, the legacy of the atomic bomb remained one of humanity's most profound contradictions. The weapon that had brought World War II to an abrupt end had also introduced an era defined by fear, diplomacy, and an ongoing struggle for control over forces beyond imagination. The Cold War had ended, yet nuclear weapons continued to shape political decisions, national identities, and global security. In the years after the Soviet Union's collapse, the world entered a period of guarded optimism. Numerous nations dismantled parts of their nuclear arsenals. International inspectors visited once secret facilities. Treaties such as START I and START II pushed the United States and Russia to reduce their stockpiles even further. Former enemies cooperated in surprising ways, sharing technology to secure loose warheads and prevent nuclear materials from falling into the wrong hands. But despite these efforts, new challenges emerged. Regional tensions in South Asia, the Middle East, and the Korean Peninsula created fresh nuclear flashpoints. India and Pakistan conducted nuclear tests in 1998, stunning the world and igniting fears of regional conflict. North Korea began secretly developing its own weapons program, using nuclear capability as leverage on the international stage. Iran's pursuit of nuclear technology led to years of negotiation and global uncertainty. Throughout this period, scientists, diplomats, and activists continued their fight for a world free of nuclear weapons. Survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki traveled the globe, sharing their stories with students, leaders, and policymakers. Their voices carried the weight of history, reminding humanity that nuclear war was not an abstract concept, but a lived reality filled with suffering and irreversible loss. The rise of globalization and interconnected economies showed nations that cooperation was essential for progress. International organizations increased efforts to monitor nuclear materials, promote safe energy use, and encourage diplomatic solutions. Yet trust remained fragile. Many countries argued that nuclear weapons were necessary for protection in an unpredictable world. Others believed that as long as any nation possessed them, true peace would remain out of reach. As the 21st century advanced, the conversation shifted once again. Climate change, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and new military technologies began reshaping global security in ways the architects of the atomic bomb could never have imagined. Nuclear weapons, though still immensely destructive, became part of a broader debate about the future of warfare and human survival. Yet the bomb's shadow continued to loom over international politics. Every treaty, every crisis, every threat carried echoes of that moment in 1945, when humanity first unleashed the power of the atom on itself. The world that emerged after the atomic bombings was not the same world that had existed just a few years earlier. Humanity had stepped into an age where destruction could happen in seconds, where wars could end instantly, and where nations no longer measured their power by armies alone, but by the invisible energy trapped inside the atom. As the ashes of World War II settled, one fact became undeniable. The atomic bomb had changed everything. It had ended the war, but it had also begun a new kind of fear. In the United States, the scientific community wrestled with guilt and pride. Some felt they had saved millions of lives by ending the war swiftly. Others felt they had opened a dark doorway that could never be closed. J. Robert Oppenheimer, once the driving force behind the Manhattan Project, now found himself haunted by the words of ancient scripture. Now am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He knew better than anyone that mankind now held the power to erase itself from existence. At the same time, countries around the globe watched with alarm. If one nation could build such a weapon, others could too. Fear spread faster than diplomacy ever could. The Soviet Union accelerated its own atomic program, determined not to fall behind, and thus began the nuclear arms race, a competition that shaped global politics for the next half-century. The creation of the bomb stopped one war, but it planted the seeds of countless future conflicts. Meanwhile, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki struggled with unimaginable suffering. Many of them had lost everything in a single flash. Families, homes, entire generations were wiped away. Those who lived carried scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Their stories became warnings to the world, a reminder of the human cost behind the science, the politics, and the war. In the post-war years, leaders debated how to prevent such destruction from ever happening again. Organizations like the United Nations pushed for global cooperation, hoping nations would come together to control nuclear weapons. But trust was fragile, and the world was divided into competing ideologies. No country wanted to be the weakest. So research continued, bombs grew more powerful, and the shadow of nuclear war stretched across the earth. Yet, in the middle of the fear, a strange hope emerged. Scientists realized that the same knowledge that created the bomb could also help humanity. Nuclear energy promised electricity for millions, medical breakthroughs, and new scientific understanding. The atom, once seen only as a weapon, began to be viewed as a tool for progress if handled responsibly. The legacy of the atomic bomb stretches far beyond the battlefields of World War II. Its impact reshaped nations, rewrote strategies, and forced humanity to confront the reality of its own destructive power. In the years following the bombings, the world found itself caught between awe and terror. Awe at the unimaginable scientific achievement that unlocked the energy of the atom, and terror at the knowledge that this same energy could wipe out civilization in minutes. As countries rebuilt from the ruins of war, they could no longer ignore the truth. The atomic age had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. For scientists, the end of the war did not bring complete relief. Many who worked on the Manhattan Project now felt a burden they had never expected. They had been driven by fear that Nazi Germany would build the bomb first. But when Germany fell and Japan became the target, their mission took on a new moral weight. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, countless scientists questioned whether they had unleashed something that humanity was not ready for. We have made a thing, some said, that even we cannot control. Their debates laid the foundation for the first calls for nuclear regulation and international cooperation. In America, the government quickly realized the power of what it possessed. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon, it was a political tool, a bargaining chip, and a symbol of global dominance. But this dominance came with a price. The Soviet Union, refusing to stay behind, launched its own nuclear program. By 1949, the USSR tested its first atomic bomb, shocking the world and ending the U.S. monopoly on nuclear power. The arms race had officially begun. The Cold War grew from this tension, a silent battle fought not with armies, but with fear. Both sides built more bombs, bigger bombs, faster bombs. The sky became filled with the threat of missiles. School children practiced hiding under desks. Families built bunkers. Humanity lived under the constant shadow of potential annihilation. And yet, despite the danger, neither side dared to use their weapons. The destructive power of nuclear bombs became the very reason they remained unused. The fear of total destruction kept the world in a strange and fragile balance. Meanwhile, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Hibakusha, became the voices of conscience for the world. Their stories of suffering, radiation sickness, and lifelong trauma served as powerful reminders of the true cost of nuclear war. They traveled the world, advocating for peace, warning future generations never to repeat the mistakes of the past. Their testimonies gave a human face to the devastation, ensuring that the memory of the bomb would never fade into mere numbers and statistics. As the decades passed, the world slowly began to understand that nuclear weapons were not simply tools of war, they were responsibilities. Treaties were signed, stockpiles were reduced. The atomic bomb was not only a product of war, it was the result of decades of scientific discovery that reshaped humanity's understanding of the universe. Long before the Manhattan Project, scientists had been exploring the mysteries of the atom, unaware that their discoveries would one day be used to create the most devastating weapon in history. In the aftermath of World War II, the world began to reflect on how science had taken such a dramatic turn, from curiosity and experimentation to destruction on a massive scale. It all began with the discovery that atoms were not solid, indivisible particles, but tiny worlds filled with energy. Physicists like Ernest Rutherford, Niels Bohr, and Marie Curie opened the doors to nuclear science, revealing forces more powerful than anything known before. When Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission in 1938 and Lise Meitner explained it, the scientific world realized that splitting an atom could unleash astonishing amounts of energy. It was a breakthrough that would change everything. After the war, the same science that created the bomb began to evolve in new directions. Scientists around the world understood that the knowledge they had gained could be used not only for destruction, but also for progress. Nuclear reactors were built to generate electricity from controlled fission, providing power to millions of homes. Hospitals began using radiation to treat cancer, saving lives instead of ending them. Research expanded into medicine, energy, agriculture, and environmental studies. The atom, once feared, now offered solutions to some of humanity's greatest challenges. Yet the ethical questions remained. Could science truly be separated from politics, from war, from human ambition? Many scientists argued that knowledge itself was not the danger lay in how societies chose to use it. This debate marked the beginning of global movements calling for responsible science. Institutes and organizations were created to ensure nuclear technology would be used wisely, safely, and for peaceful purposes. Governments, too, recognized the need for safeguards. The creation of the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) in 1957 was a major step toward monitoring nuclear programs worldwide. Its mission, to promote peaceful use of atomic energy while preventing its misuse. This organization became a cornerstone of global nuclear policy, balancing scientific progress with international security. As nations advanced their nuclear research, a deeper understanding of the atom led to new discoveries. Scientists explored nuclear fusion, the same process that powers the sun, hoping to create a clean, limitless energy source. Although fusion remains a challenge, the pursuit continues, driven by the belief that the atom still holds untapped potential that could transform the world. As the world stepped into the atomic age, politics took on a new shape, one defined not just by armies or economies, but by nuclear capability. The bomb had become more than a weapon. It was now a symbol of power, fear, and global influence. Nations realized that the future of international diplomacy would revolve around who possessed nuclear technology, who controlled it, and who could be trusted with it. The political landscape transformed in ways that no leader before 1945 could have imagined. The United States, holding the world's first nuclear arsenal, found itself in a position of unprecedented strength. But this strength came with immense responsibility. American leaders knew that if they used the bomb again, it could provoke global disaster. If they hid the technology, it could spark suspicion. And if they shared it, they could risk the weapon falling into the wrong hands. Every choice carried consequences that stretched far beyond national borders. The Soviet Union, determined not to be overshadowed, poured its resources into building its own atomic bomb. This competition marked the beginning of a geopolitical struggle that would shape the 20th century, the Cold War. The world was now divided into two superpowers, each armed with weapons capable of annihilating the other in minutes. Diplomacy became a delicate dance, one wrong step away from catastrophe. Nuclear weapons were no longer seen simply as tools of war, they were bargaining chips. They influenced treaties, alliances, and even international aid. Countries that possessed nuclear weapons gained leverage, while those without them sought protection under powerful allies. The concept of deterrence became central to foreign policy. The logic was chilling but effective. If both sides had the power to destroy each other, neither would dare to strike first. Peace, paradoxically, was maintained through the threat of total destruction. This era also saw the rise of nuclear secrecy. Nations safeguarded their research behind layers of classified information. Scientists and engineers were bound by strict security, and espionage became common. Spy networks grew as each nation tried to uncover the nuclear progress of its rivals. The stakes had never been higher. A single piece of stolen information could shift the global balance of power. At the same time, the public became increasingly aware of the risks. Protests erupted across the world, demanding disarmament and peace. Intellectuals, activists, and former Manhattan Project scientists warned of the dangers of uncontrolled nuclear expansion. Movements like the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament (CND) and Pugwash conferences emerged, urging governments to take responsibility before it was too late. Global leaders, under pressure, began working on treaties to control nuclear weapons. The 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty aimed to limit nuclear testing. Later, the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty sought to prevent the By the mid-20th century, humanity found itself living under a shadow unlike anything in history, a shadow cast not by an empire or an army, but by weapons powerful enough to erase entire continents. The atomic bomb had not only changed warfare, it had changed the way people thought, lived, and imagined the future. The world was now divided into two realities: the visible world of nations rebuilding after war, and the invisible world of nuclear tension simmering beneath every political decision. As more nations began pursuing nuclear capabilities, fear of an accidental or deliberate launch became part of everyday life. Newspapers printed diagrams of blast zones. Governments issued preparedness plans, often unrealistic, but necessary to calm public anxiety. Schools in the United States conducted duck and cover drills, teaching children to hide under desks in the event of a nuclear explosion. Across the ocean, Soviet citizens practiced similar routines, preparing for an attack that everyone prayed would never come. Yet despite the fear, life went on. Cities grew, cultures evolved, and technology advanced. People bought homes, raised children, and dreamed of the future, even if that future seemed uncertain. The atomic age had two faces, one filled with hope through scientific breakthroughs, and the other haunted by the possibility of catastrophic destruction. Hollywood, literature, and art reflected this tension. Films imagined cities turned to ashes or worlds ruled by radiation-mutated creatures. Novels warned of global apocalypse or depicted dystopian societies shaped by nuclear fear. At the same time, others celebrated nuclear energy as a miracle, clean, powerful, and full of potential. Humanity was torn between fear and fascination. Behind the scenes, governments struggled to prevent disaster. Nuclear command centers were built deep underground. Complex communication systems were developed to avoid misunderstandings that could trigger war. Military officers trained constantly, learning procedures that could decide the fate of millions within minutes. For the first time, human error posed a danger equal to enemy aggression. International tensions were highest during moments like the Berlin Crisis and the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. During these terrifying hours, leaders realized how fragile peace truly was. One wrong order, one misinterpreted message, or one malfunction could bring unimaginable destruction. These close calls forced nations to create new safeguards, new hotlines, and new diplomatic channels to prevent the world from sliding into chaos. Meanwhile, survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki continued to share their stories. Their courage and pain reminded the world of what nuclear weapons truly meant: not statistics or theories, but human lives shattered in seconds. Their voices became a guiding light for peace movements across the globe. As the atomic age unfolded, humanity found itself standing at a crossroads unlike any other in history. The world had learned how to split the atom, unlock immense energy, and create weapons capable of reshaping the planet in moments. But now came the far more difficult challenge: learning how to live with that knowledge. Nations, scientists, and ordinary citizens all faced the same question: would the atom become a force for progress or destruction? In the years after the first nuclear tests, the potential of atomic energy seemed limitless. Scientists envisioned cities powered by clean nuclear reactors, oceans desalinated to provide water to the driest regions, and medical breakthroughs that could cure once deadly diseases. Industries imagined faster ships, powerful engines, and new sources of heat and electricity. The world stood on the edge of scientific transformation, driven by the same discoveries that once fueled the Manhattan Project. But optimism existed alongside fear. Every new reactor, every new stockpile of plutonium, every new scientific breakthrough raised concerns about safety, control, and responsibility. Accidents at early nuclear facilities showed that handling atomic materials required precision and discipline at levels humanity had never attempted before. A single mistake could contaminate entire regions, poison water supplies, or cause long-lasting radiation sickness. As technology advanced, so did weapons. Hydrogen bombs hundreds of times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima became symbols of military superiority. Countries raced to build missiles, submarines, and aircraft capable of delivering nuclear strikes anywhere on the globe. The world became a chessboard where one wrong move could trigger unimaginable catastrophe. Yet, amidst this rising tension, diplomacy continued to grow. Leaders recognized that if humanity failed to communicate, it would fail to survive. Peace conferences, international treaties, and global organizations played increasingly important roles. Scientists from different nations began meeting to discuss nuclear safety, share research, and promote peaceful applications of atomic energy. These cooperative efforts marked a turning point, even in a divided world. Collaboration was possible. Ordinary citizens, too, demanded change. Peace movements gained strength, calling for disarmament and responsible use of nuclear power. Teachers encouraged students to think critically about the future. Artists created works that captured the tension between hope and fear, and communities worldwide began shaping a public conscience that insisted nuclear power should serve humanity, not endanger it. Meanwhile, the memory of the bombings continued to shape global awareness. Survivors, activists, and historians reminded the world that nuclear weapons were not abstract threats, they were real, devastating tools that had already taken innocent lives.